Hello and welcome to The Magic in You, where I am here today with Ellen Evert Hopman, who is a herbalist, author, and druid living in an oak forest in western Massachusetts, New England, in the USA. She is the ArchDruid. Now, I don't know if I can pronounce this correctly, Ellen. So is it Imitra?
Emerita.
Emerita, sorry, Emerita, ArchDruid Emerita and founder of the Tribe of the Oak, which is a Celtic Reconstructionist Druidic order. Her volumes include a wide-ranging subjects, including Celtic herbals, a trilogy of Druidic novels, children's literature, and her most recent offerings include the sacred herbs of Yule and Christmas, remedies, recipes, magics, and brews for the winter season, which is actually a part of a series around sacred herbs and the seasons, and also Celtic Druidry rituals, techniques, and magical practices that was released last year. So I'm just going to bring you onto the screen, Alan. So again, welcome to The Magic in You.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're more than welcome. Now, you said you are an arch druid imitator. Um, so this means, at least to me, that you've been involved with Druidry for a long time to reach status of Archdruid. So how did you first get involved with Druidry and how, I guess it has actually shaped your life over the years as well. So what was the first steps? Made you come to Druidry itself?
Well, I've been a druid officially for 40 years now. So that's a long time. But it started when I was a little kid. I was born in Austria, and my mother was an artist, and her name was Marcia Elizabeth Everett, and she's only getting recognition now. That was in the 1950s. But she passed away, but she recently had exhibits in Austria and in the States, um, retrospectives. But she was an artist, so and she also had Germanic ancestry and Scottish ancestry, and she thought of the Celts as her ancestors, and she was fascinated with the digs that were going on. There were archaeological digs going on when I was born in the 50s. And when I was a little kid, she would talk about the Celts, and she would talk about them with great respect. Okay, so all I remember is how she would get very respectful when she talked about them. I don't remember the details of what she was saying, and I promptly forgot about it. And we came to the States, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I heard the word Celtic again, and that was on the radio. I heard Celtic music for the first time, and I fell in love with it. Of course, the Celtic music that we have now is nothing like the ancient Celtic music, but there was that word, and I heard the tunes, and I just fell in love with it, and I became a ceilidh dancer, and I just was totally involved in that, which was Irish, of course. And then at one point, I spent a summer in Scotland at the Findhorn community. And during that summer, part of my experience there was I went to Iona, the island of Iona in Scotland, in the Hebrides. And there they were telling stories about druids. And there was that word druid. And then back in the States, I had an herb practice, and one of my clients was I was taking her case, and she mentioned that she had met a druid. And, people talk about the word witch, they hear the word witch and they know that's what they are. Well, when I heard the word druid, it was like, oh, yeah. And this was before the internet. So I had to go find some druids, and it took me a while. But I found ADF on Riocht Fine. I was one of the first members. There were about 30 of us at that point. And I worked with Isaac Bonowitz and had my first and second circle initiations. Isaac did the second one. And then one year I was at Pagan Spirit Gathering, PSG, which is a large pagan festival here in the States. Still the best one I ever went to. It's a great one. Anyway, it's in Wisconsin now, I think. But a bunch of us who were members of ADF were sitting around the campfire and we were talking about Druidism, and ADF is very Indo-European. So they were telling people that you can be a Polish Druid, you can be a Russian Druid, you can be a Norse Druid, and we knew that the Celtic culture was Celtic. So we said, wait a minute, wouldn't it be great to have a Celtic Druid order? And that was a brand new idea. So we decided right then and there, 6 of us, to create the Henge of Keltria, which we did. So I was one of the founders of that. And then later I was elected vice president did that for 9 years. And then there was a series of unfortunate events. There were Druids who were getting themselves in trouble. And that was like 10 years after Henge of Keltria was formed. And I was pretty upset about that because there were people calling themselves Druids who were doing undruidic things, I thought. So I pulled together the best Druid minds that I knew, and there were about 50 of us, and we talked for an entire year on Yahoo. And all we did was discuss, what is a Druid? What should Druids know? What kind of tools should they have? What does a Druid ritual look? What should it look like? you know. And then at the end of a year, we said, goodness, we have a Druid order because we have lessons, we have book lists, we have everything figured out. So 12 of us self-initiated and we created the Order of White Oak. Um, so again, I was the founder of the Yahoo list, and then I was a founder of the Order of White Oak. And do you need more coffee, for instance? I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning where you are. Um, but anyway, so
fine. This is really fascinating, Ellen.
all
Please
right, well, I'll
continue.
keep
Yeah.
going because it's a long story. But anyway, White Oak again lasted about 10 years. And when it fizzled out, I had personally created a lot of the lessons, and then a lot of other people contributed to lessons. And I said, heck, I don't want this to end. So then I decided I was going to create a Druid order myself. I was going to be the ArchDruid, no questions asked, no drama, no politics. I just said, Tribe of the Oak, I'm the ArchDruid, and I took it from there. And we now have a new ArchDruid, which is fabulous. And it's been about 10 years. And I really love that because that, to me, that means that it's a success. Because if you can hand on an organization to somebody else with no drama, that means you did something right, I think.
Yes, using the oak as a metaphor. You've planted the acorn, and now it's beginning to grow. But it's interesting because humans being humans, there's always going to be some people who are going to sort of step outside the bounds, or our preconceived ideas or our hopes or our own visions might only be our own, but other people will add their own influences to the vision, and next moment we find that it's going in a direction where we may not had envisioned it to go. But yes, certainly you do come from a really interesting backstory, and I think that sort of also reiterates today that when you're walking a spiritual path, regardless of what it is, and you're so invested in it, it's not something you do once a week. It takes over your life, and it really shapes your beliefs in how you see the world around you as well.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody is called to do that. There's a few people that are crazy enough to want to be clergy because we do it for no pay. It's nuts, right? Um, and it's a 7-day-a-week job for no pay. Most people just want to be congregation. That's what the average person wants. So trying to find the nutcases who are ready to take on the responsibility can be hard.
Yeah.
And they should get anybody who does that needs a lot of credit and support because we're all doing it for no pay. I mean, it's really quite amazing.
Mm. And especially in this day and age too, where there is the instant gratification, which has sort of encouraged the belief or the concept that if a seeker or a querent has a question, that they will reach out to clergy or whoever, and they expect an answer straight away, regardless of what the other person is doing or what's happening in
Oh
their
yeah.
lives. So,
Yeah.
so no doubt, because being part of clergy, being part of one of the founding members of a number of organizations, you do have your own life as well. If your clergy path is not paying the bills, you then have to, work somewhere to pay the bills. But
Mhm.
how has your so the path of Druidry in particular shaped your everyday, the lens that you look out upon the world, and especially in those more sort of trying times? Because I'm thinking of at the moment, we are all, I wake up and wondering what the heck is happening to the world. But it's from, I guess, how the vision that I see the lens throughout which I look at the world through my own beliefs, it gives me hope. I'm just wondering from a Druid point of view, how does that shape your opinion, your view on the world, especially in these darker times or more confusing times?
Well, Druidism is a nature religion, thank goodness. I mean, that's what we turn to. I mean, tribe of the oak, like we like oak trees, but we like all trees. But basically, if you go out into nature, first of all, nature is much bigger than you are. So it puts you in perspective because you realize, you're just a little tiny cog in this giant mechanism. Um, and we honor that. We don't ignore it, we honor it. And nature is very healing. I think we're very lucky that way. Um, all I have to do, I live in an oak forest, for example. All I have to do is step outside the door. But I have a saying, every tree is a church for a druid. And there's a reason for that because the roots go down to the underworld, and that's where the ancestors and the fairies are. The trunk is in the middle world, which is where the animals and the people are. The branches go up to the sky world, which is where the gods and goddesses are. So literally any tree, you can just park yourself under a tree, next to a tree, have a tree in the house. I have several. But yeah, I mean, you're in church.
Mm. And I think, as you said, it sort of brings us back into perspective and gets us out of that sort of head funk that we tend to get caught up in, and then be able to sort of like say, okay, my world, it might be a little bit chaotic at the moment, but when I breathe, if I sort of connect, especially with the oak tree, because it's such a symbol of groundedness and stability that can actually help us gain a little bit more focus and have a more of an awareness as to maybe the bigger plan, or sometimes we just need to breathe and let things happen which are beyond our control. So wanting to sort of like talk now about your books, because you have written few. I counted about 20, if that's correct. All sorts,
Roughly, yeah.
yeah. So in between, founding orders and becoming an archdruid, you also have got time to write. So, and I know you've written books on all sorts of things, as I mentioned in your introduction, including a novel series as well, and also children's literature.
Mhm.
So, out of all your books, firstly, what was the inspiration for writing the book, or in particular the first book? What's your first book that you'd written, and what was the inspiration behind that book?
Well, let's see. I've got it here somewhere. Uh, ugh, Here we go. This was the first book, Tree Medicine, Tree Magic. It originally had a yellow cover. Some people may have that book. This is the revised and expanded edition. This is another crazy story. I was in graduate school, getting a master's in counseling, and I was working in the library. That was my job. And books about trees would float in front of my awareness. And I had never lived, I live in New England, which is north, it's northern US. I had never lived this far north before, and the growing season here is very short. It's only about 3 months. Now it's a little longer because of global warming. I think maybe we're up to 4 months or even 5 months, but it was originally 3 months when I first came here in the 80s. And I just couldn't imagine how people survived because I knew that, there were settlers here, there were Native Americans here. I said, how on earth did they do it? There was only 3 months when you could find any fresh greens. What did they do? And then I looked out the window and I saw trees. And I said, wow, it must have had something to do with the trees. So then I went looking for a book and I went to bookstores. There was no online at that time. I went to the local science library at my university, University of Massachusetts. There were no books on how to eat trees or make medicine from the trees. There was nothing. And there I was in graduate school. And have you ever been in graduate school? Did you go to graduate school?
No, I haven't. I went to a polytech, but that's not the same as a graduate school.
Well, when you're in graduate school, I mean, think of it as undergraduate school on steroids. Like you have no free time, right? Every hour is accounted for. And like a nutcase, I said, well, gee, if there isn't such a book, I guess I have to write it. So while I was in graduate school, working my way through school, I decided that I had to write a book. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since. But what this book does is it has full color illustrations now. The original one was black and white. And it just gives instructions on how to cook with the trees. So, every tree, it's either roots, barks, berries, whatever, leaves. And then the medicine that you can make with the trees, and then the spiritual properties. And this book happens to be very British oriented. A lot of British folklore in here. Um, I have other books that are more Irish, but this one is British oriented, I would say, and Native American, because there were some trees that the best way to explain how they were used was to actually look at the Native American uses. And my second tree book is Irish, and that's this one, A Druid's Herbal of Sacred Tree Medicine, which is organized around the Ogham alphabet. But this one, it also has recipes in medicine. It also has Native American uses. I just find it incredibly useful. If you can't figure out how the ancient Celts used a particular tree, I mean, you can't say for 100% certain that they were doing the same thing as the Native Americans, but at least I always say what tribe, where they were from. I'm very careful. I don't make stuff up. I don't claim to be, some great voice for the Native Americans. So I say this tribe and this is how they did it. But it just it expands the view when you bring in indigenous knowledge. We're all indigenous. We're all indigenous to somewhere, but I try to be really careful about where I'm getting it from. Is it Irish? Is it Scottish? Is it British? Is it Native American? If so, which tribe?
Yeah.
Like that.
And the same thing, I mean, I'm here in Australia, and I mean, I'm not a Druid, but same with my own tradition, but also what I've witnessed and hear about online communities these days with Druid orders in Australia here. It is a similar sort of exploration, but probably more so because we're transplanting our Northern Hemispheric belief system upside down, basically, to where we are. And especially here in Australia, we do have a lot of the English trees because the settlers, the colonialists did plant them, but we also have a very strong living Indigenous culture as well. And similar to in the US, and they call them countries, each group of Aboriginal peoples have their own connection to the plants and the trees and the animals and everything to their specific area. And this is something I think too, it's almost like we've had to do this for us who follow an earth-centric tradition, to when the Northern Hemisphere stuff doesn't fit,
Mhm.
doesn't resonate. We can only take it so far, and then we need to turn to the Indigenous peoples, not to.
I have a question for you, actually. This just came up. I was teaching a class yesterday, I think. But it's fall where you are, right? I mean, we're moving into spring, so you're moving into fall,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, we're moving to autumn here. Yeah.
So what do you do about Ostara?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but this is I think very similar to a lot of people here in the Southern Hemisphere. We move the Sabbaths, the seasonal dates around to fit our environment. So we're coming up to the autumn equinox as opposed to the spring equinox because
Ah,
um,
okay.
I did write a book about it, Dancing the Sacred Wheel, which has been published about 12 years ago. It needs an update. But yeah, it's like we have to
Mhm.
change it because everything's 6 months around. And also
Right.
where I live in particular in South Australia, where sort of not all the folklore in relation to the Sabbaths, the seasons, because they're all sort of British or European based, actually resonate.
Mm.
Yeah, we're coming up to say autumn equinox. I'm living near a grape growing area, the Barossa Valley, known for its wines. And yes, this is the time of their harvesting. But when it comes to, say, Lammas or Linissa, which is traditionally the time of the grain harvest. Our grain is usually harvested around December. And
Oh my God.
so things sort of fit in, but they don't fit in. I see Lammas, which is usually at the end of January, beginning of February. That used to be the starting of our bushfire season. So to me, that was the goddess sort of cleansing, purifying the land. But then again, you have to add, well, I add sort of an extra layer of the uniqueness of Australia in that our Indigenous plants, a lot of them need that intense fire to regenerate. So it's almost
Mm.
like a different sort of form of regeneration, a cleansing, a purification for the new
Mm.
rebirth too. So yeah,
Wow.
it's we try and sort of fit it into this sort of box from the Northern Hemisphere, but sometimes it simply does not fit. So we have to
Wow.
go our own way, even for those of us who follow a tradition as well. So as you're saying with your books on the trees, I think this is where yes, we've got oak here that the colonialists have brought over, but it's just like what's the native plant, which is the equivalent. We have a she oak, but that's different to the British oak. I would say probably our redwood or our jarrah, which is probably got more of a similar qualities when you're looking at the properties and what, say, the Druids used the oak for, as being such a hard wood of sort of foundation. It's probably our redwood or our jarrah, depending on where we live in the country as well.
When you say redwood, is that like the redwoods in California, or
Oh,
is it some?
sorry, I meant red gum. I'm getting
Oh, red gum. Okay.
red gum. It's again, it's similar. It's similar properties because the redwoods
Yeah.
in California again are sort of like I saw them as the sentinels of the forest. The oaks are sort of the sentinels of the forest, and here our red gums are sort of the sentinels. But we have many forests where I live, but they have that sort of old energy, that sort of ancestral container in there, which I find really, really fascinating.
Wow.
But this is, yes, we've sort of got off track about talking about you, but this is sort of like good for people regardless of where they live in the world. It's just like, what's the indigenous plants in your
Mm.
area and how do you connect with them
Yeah,
as
and
well?
I always tell people you need to learn three herbs. If you can just learn three herbs in your area, start with three, and then if you want, you can go further. But um, I was talking to somebody recently who lives near Canada, near the border there, and they have a lot of cedar trees. We don't have that. We have white pine. So in my area, the white pine is available all winter. It's medicine, it's food, it's all kinds of things. So in my area, that would be a very important plant to know about. And up in Canada, the cedar, which is happens to be a sacred plant of the Algonquin, um, and they will not do a ceremony without it for good reason because it heals you. They use it in the sweat lodge, and so Yeah, if everybody can just learn 3 plants from their immediate area, you don't need to bring plants in from China and India and all that. Learn what grows where you are, and then you have medicine. You have medicine for free. You have food if you absolutely need it. And
Mm.
a lot goes from there. So,
Yeah, it's like the Aboriginal peoples here when they have their smoking ceremonies, which is so welcome to country, they use eucalypt. I'm not versed enough to know to sort of find out whether we have a number of eucalypt trees here as to it's a specific type of eucalypt. But then again, there's sort of cultural sensitivities around it as well. And it comes
mm,
down to the practitioner to be respectful, approach the elders, approach the wisdom keepers, and ask permission or sit with them and say, hey, is this okay for me to use this? I think this is the same thing when it comes to white sage. There's a lot of different opinions across the internet these days as to whether non-Indigenous peoples, especially non-Native American Indigenous peoples, can actually use white sage. I hear different stories. I actually have a white sage bush growing rampant in my backyard that I use, but I use
mhm.
it in a similar way that I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't assume, that the Native Americans would use it in sacred ceremony. To me, it's a sacred herb. I don't
Right.
use it any other way because I know of its, well, I'm aware of its sacred properties. Do you
Yeah.
have any insights into this, like Palo Santo, white sage, like that?
Mhm. Well, some of the Native American elders say that it's a matter of how you approach it. So if you approach it with respect, that's fine. But if you're just grabbing it all and then selling it, you know, that's a whole other story. But Europeans have, I mean, I was born in Europe, but I'm an American, but I'm a European American. We had our own plant for smudging, which was juniper. And that's Northern European. We did the same thing. We smudged the house, the barn, sick people, animals, with juniper.
Mm.
So if you want to really be culturally appropriate, of course, someone could say, "Oh, you're just an American. You can't use it," you know. But
But it's the same. It sort of like leads into our sort of our Western commercialization of spirituality. We know that
Mhm,
white sage has these special properties, so that now it's been mass produced, and it's not only been mass produced, say, in the indigenous areas where it normally would grow, it's been mass produced elsewhere in the world. So it's like we're taking the if it was produced in indigenous areas, then the local people would receive those funds. But we can get these huge smudge sticks, often made in China, and when I break
oh,
them down, a lot of them are just sticks.
yeah.
I don't know how you make them myself. When I have to cut back my sage bush, it's all leaves, and that's what I prefer to use. And the same with Palo Santo as well, because it's actually the wood of the tree, so you're actually killing a living plant.
Yeah, Palo Santo is becoming endangered now.
Yes, and again,
Because
it's largely because of the Western consumerism. But as you said,
mhm,
if we look into our own sort of family line, our own DNA, our own sort of like history, our ancestors, we each cultural groups had very similar herbs, juniper. And I think because I've got Scottish tradition, I think there's rosemary, um,
mhm.
and
Lavender.
yeah, a lot of these are just our common herbs in our garden, our lavender and rosemary that most of us have in our garden anyway, use in our cooking. And it's just like we can use them as well,
Mhm,
which is a good little segue into your series. I'm assuming it's a series of books because you have written the sacred herbs for and you've used it for the other seasons as well. And it looks like you're diving into your pile of books to get one out
Yeah,
to
I
show
have a
everybody.
handy pile. I just have to dig.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there is a series um, started with the sacred herbs of Samhain, plants to communicate with the spirits of the dead, and this one also has color pictures and medicinal properties, spiritual properties. There's a ritual in here uh, for the Morrigan, because, I picked one deity for each book, and for Samhain, the Morrigan, that's who came to me. And then the next one was this one, the Sacred Herbs of Spring, um, Magical Healing and Edible Plants to Celebrate Beltane. Also has full color pictures. This one has tons of recipes, because in the spring, it's actually spring and early summer. There's just a lot that's available, greens and so on. And there's a ritual in here for the goddess Flora, and she's a Roman goddess, which um, I usually have a thing about the Romans because, the Celts and the Romans didn't get along too well. But the goddess Flora, it turns out, she's not this flouncy little flower goddess. That's not what she is. If you go back to the ancient writings, they talk about how important it is to have flowers, because if you don't have good flowers, you're not going to get berries and fruits later, or vegetables or anything. So flora was considered incredibly important in ancient Rome, and they actually had ceremonies, and I talk about it in here. The Floralia was a big festival, and people would wear really bright clothes, and they would go to the circus, it dressed beautifully in bright colors, and they would fling beans at each other, and they would liberate goats and rabbits in, so they'd be running around the circus. Um, anyway, I have a ritual for Flora, who we need to take seriously. Okay, and then the next one was this one, the Sacred Herbs of Yule and Christmas. And the most interesting thing, this is remedies, recipes, magic, and brews for the winter season. I have a lot of brews in here that you can make, herbal brews and fruit brews and things like that. Also full color illustrations. But when you write a book, you learn a lot from writing. In fact, writing a book is a great way to answer questions. If you have questions, just start writing a book, And I didn't realize how many monsters, dark elves, um, scary things that fly through the night, werewolves, are all associated with Yule. And so I talk about that. Um, and I'm still learning about werewolves. There's a lot to know about werewolves. And I'm writing a children's book right now, and I have a whole story about werewolves.
Oh, wonderful. And do you have a book on autumn, or is that your next project after your children's book?
No, so far it's just, well, Samhain, the Sacred Herbs of
So on,
Samhain.
so on. Of course, yes. I'm looking, okay,
Yeah.
well, then we've got summer. I'm thinking you've got three, so there's one missing, so it's be summer. So that must be
Yeah, I
everyone.
haven't done that yet, but I do, I mean, oh, I have so many books, but
Yeah.
I want to talk about this one. Once Around the Sun story. This is
Oh, yeah.
stories, crafts, and recipes to celebrate the Sacred Earth Year. Um, I go through the Wheel of the Year, and I have original stories, but they're all based on folklore. They're based on traditional European folklore. So this story, Mermaids, is from Orkney. This is the god Lu. That's Irish tradition. Then we have Polish, making wreaths at midsummer. Um, and Irish again, Beltane. It's a story about young druids, druid kids. Um, Ostara, which is the next one coming up for us, also known as Easter. And then Imbolc, of course, is Irish. That's young Bridget. And oh, this is great. La Befana, the Christmas witch. So this is a book of stories to read out loud to kids, but it's also good for covens and groves. There's the Kayach at Samhain, um, because you have a story that you can read out loud based on actual tradition. And then you have a recipe that you can make and a craft that goes with each story. So, covens are always looking for activities, things to do. And
Yes.
um,
Mm.
yeah.
And I like it how it's illustrated as well. And
Hmm.
even with your book on trees, it's good to sort of like we've got that identification guide there as well, which can be very, especially when it comes to identifying plants. But here with your storybook, it's good to sort of add that visual to the deities that you're talking about as well. Mm.
Well, the new book, did we talk about the new one? I
No,
don't think,
let's talk
no,
about the
this is
new
the new
book.
one. Yeah, Celtic Druidry. This one came out last May, May 2024. So it's still relatively new. Rituals, techniques, and magical practices. So what I did with this one was when I handed over my Druid order, Tribe of the Oak, to a new ArchDruid, I started thinking about what I would have wanted to know when I was starting out. Because, 40 years is a long time, but this is a distillation of all the basic stuff that I think makes a druid. And then I had some wonderful contributions. I had several people that wrote essays. There's a beautiful essay on trees in here, and Kenneth Prufrock wrote the foreword. He's a naturopathic physician, and I had another friend who has a PhD in botany who contributed. But it's really just, what a druid is, what a druid isn't, what are the basic elements of ritual, setting up a ritual, um, sacred trees, augury, divination. What does it mean when you see a eagle? What does it mean when you see a blackbird? What does it mean when a chicken crows in the yard or in the middle of the night? What does that mean? All based on Celtic tradition. Again, I don't make stuff up. It's all based, and then the winds, what's the direction of the winds? What does that mean? If you want to do wind divination. And anyway, so it's all the basic elements of Druidism in
No, it sounds
my,
like
what I think of as Druidism.
and
Yeah.
like with other traditions, there are various interpretations of Druidry, and it's in this day and age with there's so much information out there, it can be benefit for the seeker to get one source book where they can it defines a practice, and then they can sort of take it from there.
Well, what I do also in here is each section I talk about it, and then I give people suggestions about books, like, Brehon Law books and ancient poetry. And, I tell people where to go for more because
Mm.
I don't consider myself the only authority. Um, I get worried when I see somebody write a book and they put, I am the ultimate authority, like I go, uh-oh,
Yes, yes. Probably not a rabbit hole to dive down. Now
No.
we're running we're running out of time, but I'm just gonna ask you probably a curly question, Ellen, if I may. Because you've written some 30 or 20 books. You've been a druid for a long time now.
Mhm,
You did sort of mention that one of your books contains the information that you wish you knew, but you're walking started walking on the path.
mhm.
Out of all your written works, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
But people often ask that. Um, that's really hard. Hmm. Well, I think honestly, I like this one. But I mean, each of my books, that's like saying who's your favorite cat or who's your favorite kid, like um when I'm writing a book, I'm totally immersed in that book. So right now I'm finishing up with another children's book, and it's another book of magical fairy tales. Um, and I'm just very proud of myself because I tackle, like I have novels. You mentioned the novels. Um, and I had never written a novel. I was not an English major. Nobody told me how to do it. I had to figure it out. And it took me 9 years to write the first one, Priestess of the Forest. And then this one's 2nd century Ireland. And then it goes to Scotland, the Druid Isle, and then Priestess of the Fire Temple goes back to Ireland again. But I tackled a whole new, I went from nonfiction, I went to novel writing. So that was really hard initially. But then I was pretty proud of myself for doing that. And then I went to children's books. So it's like each project that I tackle, that's what I like, I guess, whatever I'm working on at the time.
It's fantastic. And on top of that, of course, you've got the tribe of the oak, even though you've sort of stepped that away from being the ArchDruid, you're still connected with it, and your own website, which will be listed below this recording for people who want to get in touch with you, wanting to find out where they can get hold of your books and anything else that you have on offer, because you do present as well online. Do you have any online courses or anything coming up, or is everything on your website?
Yeah, I just taught a class yesterday. Um, yeah, I just became a teacher at University Magicus. And if you go to my website, which is elleneverthopman.com, there's a page for events. So I tend to post when I'm going to be doing something. And I'm going to be doing a whole series of classes for them. But I have other things happening. And you can also, if you go to elleneverthopman.com, you can also ask me questions. I have a contact me section. I'm happy to answer questions if people have them. Um, if you live in Australia, however, I used to ship books to Australia, and then the postage has gotten so expensive and it's so slow. And I found out I was actually losing money. And when that started happening, I said, no, I cannot be mailing books at my own expense. I just can't do that. So if you live anywhere other than the United States, I ask people, and I know this is politically incorrect, but it's perfectly okay. Go to Amazon because they have everything. They have all my books. They have the Kindle versions, the audio versions, the written stuff. I mean, it's all there. But if you live in the States, you can order from me, or you can go to Amazon or Simon and Schuster. I have a page there.
And also local bookshops too also have distributors and contacts there. So go down to your
Yeah,
local bookshop and see if they can get in any of Ellen's books as
yeah, they
well.
can get some of them, but not all of them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, absolutely everything's on Amazon, like
Yes,
the
everything
Kindle
else these
books,
days.
the ebooks are all on Amazon.
Yeah, yeah. But definitely I'll put the links below for people who want to find out more about you, Ellen. So we're having to wrap up. It's been wonderful talking to you today. So thank you very much for talking about the magic in you.
Well, I do want to add that if you want Druid studies, you can go to tribeoftheoak.org.
Right.
And that's the website, tribeoftheoak.org. You can write to the Archdruid and ask, read all the little sections, look at our virtual altars and, the information that we have there. And if it appeals to you, if it's what you want, it is Celtic Reconstructionist Druidism. It is based on actual writings from the 6th and 7th century, very Irish oriented. But if that kind of thing appeals to you and you're ready to actually engage and do the work, you can ask to be admitted and most likely you will be.
And take it
So,
from there. No, it sounds
yeah,
fantastic. And again, the links to that will be listed below this recording as well. So thank you for being part, Ellen,
thank
and
you.
have a wonderful day. Blessings.